Hello and welcome back to the Guide to Digital. I'm Chris and today we're going to be looking at how we actually use a Jupyter Notebook to learn about how applications work. And we're going to be looking at the overall program for this guide and variables, which are the core of how we assign and use data in Python. These are going to seem a little bit granular, but they're really necessary for us just to take the bigger steps. They're the foundational building blocks, Lego blocks that everything else is going to be part of. So you should already have gone through book 1 or episode 1, and from there you'll have an instance of the Jupyter Notebook running in Binder. So this means on your screen you'll have a working copy and you can actually work through and make changes on your own machine. And that's how this guide is designed to work. It's not something you just watch and have me playing in the background while you're watching TV. You should have your own instance of Jupyter Notebooks open with the guide, and as you go through, you'll actually be making changes. You'll be playing with items, you'll be making changes to data, and you'll be building something with it. And this is what I think will really help people understand the concepts and the potential of technology and applications in your work. So we're now going to turn over to the notebook. I will be looking at my screen, but I'll keep coming back to you and make sure you're following along. Right. One other thing I should have mentioned before. This is the gentle guide to digital for executives. If you're not an executive, do not worry. A little bit tongue-in-cheek. I figured if executives could understand this, if I could make it simple enough and easy enough so that somebody who's not used to kind of digging into these things could understand it, it would be good for anyone else. So if you're over at a grade 3, grade 4 level, you're probably just fine. And we'll just kind of keep rolling with that. So away we go. So first, we're going to actually run our first code cell in Jupyter. So what I'd like you to do is take your mouse. I want you to go in this cell here, right? So Jupyter uses code cells. And this is how Jupyter actually runs Python code or any code in the notebook. So to run a cell, you're basically going to hold down Shift and you're going to hit Enter. And when you do that, you're going to see an in with a number, and it keeps track of the number of cells that you've run, so you can see kind of where you left off. And you're going to see an out, and that out is 3,600. So let's have a look at what we're actually doing in the cell. First of all, we are typing something in, seconds underscore in underscore an underscore hour. It's very good when you're writing things in Python to be explicit. In other words, don't just use X or Y unless it's very easy and you know exactly what you're talking about. But if you're talking about employees or you're talking about salary, use that name. It makes it a lot easier for you and potentially other people to understand your programs. So here we're saying seconds in an hour, which is all one word or one element in Python, equals 60 times 60. So this is called a variable assignment. And we'll get into variables in a bit, but basically what we're saying is seconds in an hour is equal to 60 times 60. And then the second line is we're writing the variable, which is seconds in an hour, and it is outputting the value that we've assigned to it. 60 times 60 is 3,600. You want to go back in and say seconds in an hour is 60 times 50, which is wrong, but you can do that. You can make that change. You hold down Shift again, you hit Enter, and it will then run and it will give you a different value. So in the first episode, I said Jupyter Notebooks have been extraordinarily powerful because it allows you to play. And this is exactly how it works. So you can try something, and then if it doesn't work out exactly how you want, you've seen the output, and you go back and you make the changes to get it to work the way you want. So you don't need to go through a whole thing or run a whole bunch of different pieces of code. It lets you run code and analysis in little segments, understandable snippets, and that lets you go back and update and amend things. So that's how you run any cell. You'll also see that when I do this, Shift Enter, it then goes down to the next cell. So I can then hit Shift Enter again, and it will continue going down. So you can actually just keep typing Shift Enter through the whole thing, and it will run all of the code. If there's an error, it will show you the error, but otherwise it will keep going through. So So that's how you'll use a Jupyter Notebook. There are other things that you can do with it, but for this guide, that should be all you really need to know. There's going to be gray cells. These are code cells. You'll see different colored text in them because they're highlighted to reflect the type of code and what you're trying to do. And we're going to update the code in each of these cells, and Shift Enter will run the cell, which will generate an output. All right, so we're good. Let's go. So this is what we're actually going to be doing today. I talked about building blocks, and we're going to be looking at 5 through the guide. So the first 2 that I'm hoping to cover in this episode are variables and data structures. Variables are the core fundamental element of programming. It's basically assigning data to a piece of memory and having a hook or an anchor to it. And that's what a variable is. So if we go back up, seconds in an hour is a variable. We've assigned it the value of 60 times 60, or in our case, 60 times 50. But it's basically all about storing and manipulating data. The next element is data structures, and this is how we put single elements of data together to build more complex data structures, but also it allows us to do a whole bunch of other things, such as using conditionals to run through things or using loops. And these are the other pieces. So I'm not going to read through them, but we will be going through each of them in detail. So for right now, we're going to just kind of move along to the project. And again, I wanted this to be a concrete, practical thing. I wanted you to be able to come through this to test, to see how code works, to build something with it, so you can then take that back. And when you're working with engineers or when you're thinking about technology and applications, you have a basis for your awareness and your understanding of what your teams might be doing. So our case study is actually building an employee leave system. So this is one way you can tell we're from government. I wanted to pick something that was easy to understand, that everyone would kind of be able to kind of glom onto, but it's also a really boring thing to build. So I'm sure you'll come up with better ideas or better things to build, but this seemed to be a good base to kind of to base the guide around. So what we're going to do is build an employee system. So you are going to build this, and we're going to write code that will accept an employee directory. So we're going to have a list of employees. It's going to be able to report an employee's leave balance. We're going to be able to accept a leave request. We will accept or refuse it based on the employee's leave balance and the hours requested. And we will then add leave to an employee's bank. So that's what we're going to do through the whole guide, but we're going to do it in pieces. So we're going to kick off with variables. So a variable, again, is how you define an object in Python. And the very easy way to do this is you have the name of the variable, you have an equal sign, and you have a value. There's all sorts of different variables in Python, but let's have a quick look down. So we're going to start off, because we're looking at a leave system, with the name of a supervisor. So my name's Chris. So what I have in this cell is supervisor equals Chris. So one thing you'll notice is that the name Chris is in quotations. Having it in double quotes or single quotes will basically tell Python that this is a string, which is a kind of data made of characters. But if you hear a programmer talking about a string, they're basically just talking about text. It doesn't need to be a single word. This could be a whole sentence. Everything inside those double quotes counts as part of the string. So here, what I want you to do is go in and I want you to change your name, or change Chris to your name. So instead of Chris, if my name was Anthony, I would change it like that. So you just double click on the name, change it to whatever you want. Make sure you're keeping the double quotes, and then run the cell. So Shift, Enter. We have an in. We aren't asking for any output, so the notebook isn't going to show us anything. But we've done this. It has accepted the variable, and we've built it into our program or the kernel memory. So here, if we then go down to the next cell, where if we just write the name of a variable, we're asking the notebook to show it back to us. So that's what we're going to do here. So you're going to hit Shift and Enter again, and you're going to see supervisor equals Anthony in this case. So I'm going to change this back to Chris, because this is going to continue going through the program. I hit Shift Enter, I've changed it. I go back in here. Supervisor is now Chris. So you should have your name showing up here. If you don't, you'll want to make sure that you're running a real notebook, that everything's set up on Binder. If you have any questions, just drop it to me in the comments or hit me up on Twitter, but otherwise we're going to keep moving. We can also change or update variables after they've been created. And I just did that in switching the name to supervisor to Anthony and then back to Chris. But we can also change it in other ways. So here, if I say supervisor is Chris Allison, also me, I hit enter. And again, because we're putting supervisor in the code block, we're asking for that output. Supervisor is now Chris Allison. So this is very, very handy because it means you can replace data within the Python program. And an example of this might be an employee leaves or employee's leave balance changes. We don't need to create a new variable. We can update an existing variable. And this happens all the time in programs. So there are also different kinds of variables. So we've already talked about strings, pieces of text. There's also integers. So if you look here in this cell, you'll say A equals 7. 7 is an integer. So any number, no fractions, is an integer. It's pretty simple in Python. B equals 3.14, or pi. Any decimal or any number with a decimal in it or a fraction is a float in Python. So you don't need to really know about floats too much, but just it's important. Like basically Python differentiates integers and floats, and most programming languages do. And finally, we have C equals true. And true is a type of variable. It is a Boolean. So Boolean is yes or no, true or false. You'll remember back up in the first episode, we had if ate breakfast equals false. So that was checking to see if a variable, which is a Boolean, is true or false. So we're going to go through here. And then in the next line, you'll see we're writing A, B, and C separated by commas. So first of all, we have to run this cell, otherwise the next thing won't work. So we hit Shift and Enter. We've input that. We have in 9 here. And then the next cell, we can output it. So you'll notice there are brackets around this. That basically is a different kind of data structure. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but we won't cover it for now. Right now, again, what we've done here is assign 3 variables, 1 per line. 1 is an integer, 1 is a float, which is a number with a decimal or a fraction, and the third one is a Boolean. So we're going to move on. Now, you can also perform operations on variables. So if we say A plus B in the next code cell, we can actually add an integer and a float together. So Python is a loosely typed language, or a duck typing language, which basically means that Python will look at any variable that you enter and it will guess what it is. And Python's been designed so that if you do something that happens all the time, like adding 2 numbers together, even if one is a float and one is an integer, it will just figure it out for you. So again, it makes it very, very easy just to make things happen and to try things without getting into trouble. Another example is A star star B, and the star star basically means to the power of. So A to the power of B, so 7 to the power of 3.14, turns out to be 450.4. So these kinds of calculations can be very, very easy to do. And again, computers can do them very, very fast and can do them many hundreds, thousands of times per second, and more than that. So that's the basics for variables. If there's anything here that was confusing, stop, rewind, watch that little segment again. But we're going to be using variables again and again. The core concepts that you need to know: you're going to be naming a variable. The name has to be one element, one object, which is why Python uses snake case to connect different words. If you need more than one, for example, days in a year with underscores in between would be a variable in Python. You're going to have an equal sign to assign something, and then you're going to have a value on the other side of the equal sign. That's all you need to know, and that's the end of episode 2. Please come back and join me for episode 3 when we'll dig into data structures.